This is the new Seat Arona, and by new I mean lightly facelifted for 2022. Now don't let that put you off. There are actually some significant upgrades under the skin that might make you want to head over to yesauto.co.uk and go and buy one. And we're actually going to look at the new and improved Ibiza as well, because the Ibiza is essentially the super mini version of the Arona. But before I go any further, if you like what you see, why not give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. At first glance, it doesn't look like a whole lot has changed on the new Arona, but when you look closely, and I mean really closely, you'll go, oh, I see it now. And I think the big change is really a new-ish front end that's highlighted by a new-ish grille. Now, it's the same overall shape as the old car, but it just seems to sit a little bit deeper, and you also get a new mesh design. Now, a bit further down the bumper, I'd say the design is just a little bit more angular, designed to make it look a little sportier. Now on this car we have silver painted bodywork at the bottom, which makes it kind of look a little bit like a guard, and you also get that at the rear of the car, almost as though this car is more rugged and ready to go off-road. But if you were to go for the FR model, you get something that's a bit more sportier, and this front end is highlighted with gloss black. Now the other changes at the front, we've got LED headlights as standard now, and also the fog lights are integrated into the bumper. They used to be down here and then now up here. Again, just making it look a little bit more off-roady. There are also some new alloy wheel designs. These are 18 inches on this Luxe model, and they kind of have this diamond cut look, which I think looks very fancy. And at the back of the car, this rear bumper has been lightly tweaked, and on this car we have, again, that kind of silver finish to make it look a little bit like a guard, so you could go off-roading, although I wouldn't really recommend taking your Arona off-road. But if you go for the FR, again, that's all painted in black. There's a new wing at the back, gives it a slightly sportier look. But the big change is Seat's new font for the Arona name, because Seat is all about its new fancy font. In fact, you can see that on the new Leon by clicking the link in the top right-hand corner to watch our Seat Leon estate review. Over to the Ibiza, and yes, this is the 2022 model and not the older one, because Seat has been extremely conservative with the design tweaks on this new car. So the big ones are new LED headlights, which now come as standard. The front bumper has allegedly been changed, but for the life of me, I can't figure out how it's been changed. I've been doing back-to-back comparisons with the two Ibizas, one old, one new, and I can't see it. If you know, let me know down in the comments, because it is a very, very small difference. Further round, we've got three new alloy wheel designs, two 17s and an 18. The ones that you see here are one of the 17 inches. And at the back, we have a huge change, which is the Ibiza name now in the new fancy Seat font. That's it. Things are pretty familiar under the bonnet as well, because Seat has taken the engine lineup from the old car and moved it into the new car. That means on both the Arona and the Ibiza, you get a couple of 1 litre 3-cylinder engines producing either 95 or 110 horsepower, and there's also a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder engine producing 150 horsepower. Now on the Ibiza, you can also get the 1 litre in 80 horsepower form, and that plus the 95 come with a 5-speed manual gearbox. If you go for the 110, you get a 6-speed manual or a 7-speed auto. And if you go for the 150 horsepower 1.5 litre motor, that comes with a 7-speed dual clutch gearbox. All cars are front wheel drive, and there are no sports models either. If you want a performance Seat, you'll need to go for a Cupra. And you can watch my review of the Cupra Leon estate by clicking the link in the top right-hand corner. But it's inside where you'll find the biggest changes, because the top section of the dashboard has been pretty much completely redesigned, chucking out the old integrated infotainment system, and instead you get this new floating style panel in the center of the dash. Measuring in at 9 inches, the screen is pretty sharp and responsive once the whole system has warmed up. It runs the full version of Seat's latest infotainment software with quick access menus on the home screen and also an iPad-like menu when you go a little bit deeper into the system. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to, and it's a bit fiddly, but in all fairness, you get used to these things pretty quickly, and once you're a week or two into using the car, it's going to become like second nature to you. And if you don't get along with the system, you get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto thrown in for free, and they're wireless too. This larger screen is only available on the mid-range and above cars. If you go for the lower spec models, you're going to get a smaller 8-inch panel instead. There's also an optional 10.25-inch virtual cockpit, which has got lots of different views and menus, and personally I think it's actually one of the best on the market. But if you go lower down the range, that will be replaced by analog dials. Behind that sits a very sporty steering wheel, which is lovely to hold, and you get physical buttons as well for the volume and changing tracks, which is great because you get touch shortcuts on the infotainment screen, which are a little bit fiddly. You also get physical buttons for the climate controls as well. And while the overall cabin design is a touch on the dull side, you do actually get these trim elements across the center of the dash and around the vents, which you can choose in different colors, although in this Arona, they've gone pretty minimalist. And you get ambient lighting in here as well. It's worth pointing out as well that the interior design of the Arona is exactly the same as that on the Ibiza, and the options are the same too. The big difference though really comes down to boot space. This being a crossover, we have 400 litres of storage, which is the same as the old car, and also on the Ibiza it matches the old car at 355 litres. Space in the back of the Arona isn't too bad. I'm just under 6 foot. I've got the driver's seat in my position, and legroom isn't too bad. I think if you were 6 foot, you'd be all right, but anything above that, it might start to feel a little bit tight. And the same goes for headroom as well. There's actually quite a bit still to go, but if you were over 6 foot, it would start to feel perhaps a little bit on the cramped side. There's not actually a lot to do back here either. There's no armrest, unfortunately, nor is there any heating controls or somewhere to plug in your smartphone. So if you're on a long journey, you just have to look out the window. Back in the Ibiza, and as you'd expect, this is a slightly smaller car, so we have a little less room. So with the driver's seat in my position, legroom feels about the same as the Arona, but it's headroom that just feels a little bit tighter. So if you're 6 foot and over, I think it's going to start to feel a little bit cramped in the back of the Ibiza. And like the Arona, there's really not a lot to do back here. You have no armrest, there's nothing to connect a smartphone up with, and if anything, I think the transmission tunnel is a little bit bigger. So if you sat in the middle, it might just be a bit more uncomfortable. So how much do the upgraded cars cost? Well, the new Arona comes in at just over £19,200 and the Ibiza just under £17,000. It's a little bit smaller and therefore a little bit cheaper. Now, you'll be able to buy these new models on yesauto.co.uk in the very near future, but it's also worth shopping around on the website because you might be able to save some money on one of the pre-facelift cars if you think the upgrades aren't really worth it. So we're going to start things off with the Arona, which is actually the smallest crossover in Seat's lineup. However, although it feels like a small car to manoeuvre, it actually feels like quite a big car on the inside, and we've got great visibility thanks to a nice big windscreen and also quite a tall driving position. So on to why this feels like quite a small car to manoeuvre. Well, a lot of that's down to the steering. It's really very light and also very responsive. So just little inputs of the steering wheel means that you get a almost instant translation to a change of direction through the front wheels. You also have really nice and light pedals. So all the controls of this car just feel easy and stress-free. What I will say is Seat is seen as the sportier one of the cheaper VW Group brands, but in all fairness, you're not going to get anything remotely sporty about the steering or the controls. This is a family or a compact crossover, and it doesn't feel that engaging to drive, but who cares? That's not really what the Arona is about. The engine. So in here, we've got the 110 horsepower, 1 litre motor. Seat thinks this is going to be the best seller of the bunch, and performance, I would say, is fine. It's not going to melt your face. I wouldn't even call it all that brisk, but it's going to get you up to speed if you're getting onto a motorway and if you need to make a quick overtake. So long as you're planning ahead, you should be able to do it, no problem. Again, there is the 150 horsepower car if you want something that's a little bit punchier, and because it's got the 7-speed DSG, it should also fly through the gears really quickly. Just to point out that we've got the 7-speed auto in here, and you don't get paddles on the back of the steering wheel. So if you want to change gear manually, you can knock the lever down here and go to the plus or minus, but I always find that's a little bit clunky. Now, Seat is very keen to stress that you get more driver safety kit on these newer models. So what we have now is a lane keep assist. So when you're driving along, it'll keep the car squarely in the center of the lane. You can also get the optional travel assist, which is kind of like Seat's budget version of Tesla's autopilot. So what that does is it combines lane keep assist to keep you in the center of your lane with adaptive cruise control. So if the person in front of me starts to slow down, I'll slow down as well, so I don't go plowing into the back of them. But if you go for the 80 horsepower Ibiza, you also get cruise control included as standard. A first for the entry-level Super Mini. And speaking of the Ibiza, I think it's time we head over to the Super Mini to see how it compares with the Arona. Now we're in the Ibiza, and while the Arona and the Ibiza are really similar on the inside, to drive they're actually quite different, which is great because it means I've got a lot to talk about. First of all, we're in the 95 horsepower Ibiza, and that means we've got the 5-speed manual. And it's a really good gearbox. I find that on the cheaper VW group products, so those are Volkswagen cars and Skodas, the manual gearboxes are really quite horrible because they're very vague and soft and ugh. But in here, the gears feel like they're a lot more defined, so I can really feel the H pattern underneath, rather than feel like I'm just churning butter. And it's actually really easy to stay on top of the power as well. 95 horsepower doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got 5 gears at your disposal to flick through nice and easily, you just feel a little bit more connected to the way this thing drives. The steering feels quite different as well. So in the Arona, it's very, very sharp and accurate, but very light and airy. Whereas here in the Ibiza, there's just a little bit of weight to it. So it's still nice and direct. But I guess if you're wanting something that feels a bit sportier to reflect the Seat badge, then the Ibiza kind of has you covered on that front. And it kind of makes you think if this is probably the best Super Mini to go for, at least from the VW group, because underneath this is a Volkswagen Polo, and I think it feels nicer inside. It feels a little bit more premium, and I think it's also nicer to drive. What lets it down a little bit is the Ibiza is definitely firmer than the VW Polo. Yes, if you're really sensitive to bumpy rides, then maybe you might want to look at a Polo, but for everybody else, I think the Ibiza might actually beat the car that it's based on. Those were just my first impressions. Today is just a first drive, and we'd need them in just a little bit longer to see what we really think of them. But let's say you had 25 grand to get a well-spec'd Arona or Ibiza. Which one would you go for? Me? I think I would go for the Arona.